Okay, so let's take a look at ganache. Um, in the world of science of baking, we're going to be taking a look at crystallized ganache and pre-crystallized ganache and ganache that's not crystallized. And this is not crystallized. Right now, this chocolate is just chocolate chips. Our typical way of making ganache, we'll take hot cream. We'll pour that cream. This is 6 ounces of chocolate, 3 ounces of cream. We'll just pour that over the chips and allow it to sit. That's going to allow the chocolate to melt, and we will then take one of our pieces of butter and put it in here, and we'll stir that together to emulsify it. The other way to approach ganache is to pre-crystallize it. And I've taken this chocolate and melted it over some warm water. I just barely melted it, and I left it with some lumps in it, and I've stirred those lumps out, so now it's nice and smooth. And this is just chocolate chips. There's nothing fancy. As you can see, these are just good old semi-sweet chocolate chips, and but we can make a fine ganache out of these. While we're waiting for this to sit, while we're waiting for this to cool down, I'm going to take this chocolate, which is melted, but just barely. And the idea here was to get the chocolate up to about 95 degrees Fahrenheit or so, until there were still some lumps in it, and then I pulled it off the fire, stirred those lumps in, and what they're doing essentially is those lumps are retaining some of the crystalline cocoa butter crystals that we want. And out of all the crystals we want in cocoa butter, ideally we'd like to keep some of the Form 5 crystals, and the Form 5 crystals are the ones that will dominate in chocolate if we allow them to. So we just need to keep some of those unmelted to kind of teach the rest of the chocolate what to do. Since this chocolate is not fully melted on a microscopic level, there are still some crystals that are intact in here. We're going to take some liquid, and this could be heavy cream, it could be milk. In this case, I'm going to use water, and you can actually make a water ganache. I'm going to pour the water in at room temperature. This is room temperature water, 3 ounces to 6 ounces of chocolate. Room temperature chocolate, basically at about 85 degrees, 90 degrees, and water at about the same temperature. And I'm going to bring these two together. Normally, we would say water, that's the enemy of chocolate. What we're going to do is we're going to bring these two together into an emulsion. There's twice as much chocolate as there is water here. So we're just going to bring it on together, stirring it until it starts to emulsify. I know a lot of you will say, well, why don't you pull out the immersion blender? Well, the reason why I'm not doing that today, even though I have one in the kitchen, is because I don't want to use tools in these videos that you may not have at home. You could, of course, go out and buy an immersion blender. That's a really nice tool to have around the kitchen. But if we just stir this together, the chocolate, being the dominant ingredient here, will allow an emulsion to form. And form a ganache. And because we haven't knocked it completely out of temper when we melted it, this ganache should respond very well. All right, let's pick up where we left off. This one I managed to get to in a nice emulsion, and we've got a nice smooth ganache. The water-based ganache has a little bit of butter added to it, and I managed to work that in. You want to work in the butter until it's fully incorporated. As for our regular ganache, this is our non-crystallized version. We'll bring this together into an emulsion. What I do is I start with small circles in the center, start working my way out to the outside of the container until it comes together as a nice smooth mixture. And I'll drop that butter in. We'll start working that in. I want to work the butter in, as I say, until it's fully incorporated. It may take some stirring to get it there because it is just soft butter at this point, and it's not melting the butter in. What we're doing is we're working that fat of the butter as a solid into the ganache. It's going to add shine, but it's also going to help the ganache in firming as it cools. So what's the difference between this kind of ganache and the crystallized ganache? The pre-crystallized ganache essentially means that the chocolate has not lost its temper. Instead, we took tempered chocolate right out of the bag, we melted it, but not all the way. We just got it to a point where it's just warm enough to start melting, and then we left some lumps in it and stirred that together. Essentially what we're doing is we're retaining the tempered quality of the chocolate. This ganache will firm up and become much more firm more quickly because it is essentially still tempered chocolate. It just has some liquid added to it and emulsified in with it. This ganache, on the other hand, will remain quite fluid for quite a bit of time. In fact, this kind of ganache, when it's not crystallized, when you pour hot liquid over the chocolate, it throws it out of temper, melts all the cocoa butter, and basically you have a non-tempered ganache. Now, the non-tempered ganache has its uses. We can take this ganache and let it sit overnight, and it will firm to about the consistency of cake frosting. It's great for icing a cake. It's also good for when we want to use it as a sauce, because it does come up to a nice sauce consistency. And it can be used in its firmer state, eventually, as a softer truffle center. The principle behind this is that we have cocoa butter that is stable and intact, and you can see how firm this is starting to get. And we have cocoa butter that is unstable and has been melted. What's the advantage here? Well, the big advantage I see for using a tempered ganache is the ability to use it right away with a little bit of agitation. This ganache, this tempered ganache, will end up being firm enough to actually pipe for truffles, and we can use it to make truffle centers. This ganache will take until tomorrow. They're both have valid uses, and they both have a valid purpose. But for when I need my ganache ready to use quickly, I'll go with the tempered ganache every time. It makes all the difference in the world. Now, when you're doing some research on ganache, take a look and see what's out there on YouTube and on Google, and find some sources for talking about ganache. I think you'll find that as we progress further along in our class, we will start to find other applications for these. But you'll start to find information that people are using these different ganache preparations for different things. And they're using the tempered ganache quite a bit more these days because of its ability to be ready quickly and to have really good gloss and to behave like real tempered chocolate instead of behaving like it's untempered, where it won't harden on its own without a great deal of time. All right, so a little bit later, after this cools down a little bit and it has had a chance to crystallize and hold its shape a little better, I'm going to pipe this out to be used for truffle centers. And we're going to be doing some truffles a little later in our other class, so when we get ready to use those, I'll use this ganache for that purpose. We'll see you in the next video. So now that we've made some ganache, we're going to have to do something with it. We're going to take our ganache and we're going to pipe it out into individual portions. Now, as I pipe this out into portions, I'm getting ready to make essentially truffle centers out of these. So I'm going to take each one of them, I'm going to take this whole sheet pan, I'm going to stick it in the refrigerator to let this ganache firm up a little bit more. There's three things the chocolate always has to have. It has to have time to crystallize. It needs temperature to do it right, so it either be cool for crystallization or warmth for melting. And it needs agitation. And even this practice of piping it, even putting it through a piping bag like this, is agitating it. And what that's doing is it's inducing the crystals of cocoa butter to start crystallizing and aggregating together. So as you can see, you can get quite a few out of this one little batch. All right, these are going to go off to the refrigerator to chill, and once they've had a chance to firm up and fully crystallize, we'll remove them from the paper and we're going to roll them and eventually enrobe them in tempered chocolate. So stay tuned.